Yo, 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 what the hell is up? So, there was a dinner party at my house tonight, and my housemate was playing Sade, and made me think of this essay recommended to me by a dear friend, written by Slavoj Zizek. It's called Kant and Sade, The Ideal Couple, and basically it's Zizek on Lacan, on the relationship between Kant and Sade. And I want to stress very clearly that neither Zizek, especially Zizek, but neither Zizek nor Lacan are saying that Kant is Sade, that you should read Kant as you read Sade. But I think they're just kind of exploring the injunction of the two, and the fact that very often people have read Kant in a sadeian way, and that has led to microfascisms. Anyway, I'll just read it and you can decide for yourself. Of all the couples in the history of modern thought, Freud and Lacan, Marx and Lenin, Kant and Sade is perhaps the most problematic. The statement, Kant is Sade, is the infinite judgment of modern ethics, positing the sign of equation between two radical opposites, i.e., asserting that the sublime disinterested ethical attitude is somehow identical to, or overlaps with, the unrestrained indulgence in pleasurable violence. A lot, everything perhaps, is at stake here. Is there a line from Kantian formalist ethics to the cold-blooded Auschwitz killing machine? A lot is at stake here. These people are so dramatic. Anyway, continuing. Are concentration camps and killing and genocides as a neutral business the inherent outcome of the enlightened insistence on the autonomy of reason? Is there at least a legitimate lineage from Sade to fascist torturing, as is implied by Pasolini's film version of Salo, which transposes it into the dark days of Mussolini's Sala Republic? Lacan developed this link first in his seminar on The Ethics of Psychoanalysis, 1958 to 1959, and then in the Écrit Kant with Sade of 1963. So Lacan wrote an essay called Kant with Sade of 1963, and what is the word with as a conjunction? In logic, it's represented by a little hat symbol, and it's just it's not the same thing as Kant is Sade, but it's kind of alongside, or they're both true at the same time. So maybe in this essay, Lacan was okay, what if they were both true at the same time? That made absolutely no sense, but real ones get it. Anyway, part 1. There's 3 parts. For Lacan, Sade consequently deployed the inherent potential of this Kantian philosopher. Let me start again. For Lacan, Sade consequently deployed the inherent potential of the Kantian philosophical revolution in the precise sense that he honestly externalized the voice of conscience. The first association here is, of course, what's all this fuss about? Today, in our post-idealist Freudian era, doesn't everybody know what the point of the with is? The truth of Kant's ethical rigorism is the sadism of the law, i.e., the Kantian law is a superego agency that sadistically enjoys the subject's deadlock, his inability to meet its inexorable demands, like the proverbial teacher who tortures pupils with impossible tasks and secretly savours their failings. So, Kantian moral, this is just my own contribution, he's saying that everyone knows that Kantian law is kind of like this fascistic superego that likes to browbeat you and like sadistically torture you. Like, it's a very fascist conception of Kantian law. But is this the only way of reading Kant? Anyway, no spoilers. Okay, so Zizek continues. Lacan's point, however, is the exact opposite of this first association. It is not Kant who was a closet sadist. It is Sade who is a closet Kantian. That is to say, what one should bear in mind is that the focus of Lacan is always Kant, not Sade. What he is interested in are the ultimate consequences and disavowed premises of the Kantian ethical revolution. In other words, Lacan does not try to make the usual reductionist point that every ethical act, as pure and disinterested as it may appear, is always grounded in some pathological motivation. For example, the agent's own long-term interest, the admiration of his peers, up to the negative satisfaction provided by the suffering and extortion often demanded by ethical acts. That is the way that people usually read Kant. The focus of Lacan's interest rather resides in the paradoxical reversal by means of which desire itself, i.e., acting upon one's desire, not compromising it, can no longer be grounded in any pathological interests or motivations, and thus meets the criteria of the Kantian ethical act, so that following one's desire overlaps with doing one's duty. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. Suffice it to recall Kant's own famous example from his critique of practical reason. Suppose that someone says his lust is irresistible when the desired object and opportunity are present. Ask him whether he would not control his passions if, in front of the house where he has this opportunity, a gallows were erected on which he would be hanged immediately after gratifying his lust. We do not have to guess very long what his answer may be. Lacan's counter-argument here is, okay, but what if we encounter a subject, as we do regularly in psychoanalysis and just like IRL, who can only fully enjoy a night of passion if some form of gallows is threatening him, i.e., if by doing it he is violating some prohibition? Some real sick, messed up daredevils out there. So Zizek continues. There was this Italian film from the 60s, Casanova Semini, starring Werner Lisi and Marcello Mastroianni, that hinged on this very point. The hero can only retain his sexual potency, by which he means his boner, if doing it involves some kind of danger. At the film's end, when he's on the verge of marrying his beloved, he wants at least to violate the prohibition of premarital sex by sleeping with her the night before the wedding. However, his bride unknowingly spoils even this minimal pleasure by arranging with the priest for special permission for the two of them to sleep together the night before, so that the act is deprived of its transgressive sting. Wow, she seems like real fun at a party. What can you do now? Actually, she sounds kind of feisty. She's literally me. Never mind. So what can he do now? In the last shot of the film, we see him crawling on the narrow porch on the outside of a high-rise building, giving himself the difficult task of entering the girl's bedroom in the most dangerous way, in a desperate attempt to link sexual gratification to mortal danger. So, Lacan's point is that if gratifying sexual passion involves the suspension of even the most elementary egotistic interests, if this gratification is clearly located beyond the pleasure principle, then, in spite of all appearances to the contrary, we are dealing with an ethical act. Then his passion is stricto sensu ethical. His passion is, in a strict sense, ethical. Because, like, yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's not hedonistic, but it is like like, what he wants to do is not immediately pleasurable, like a nice bath, but yeah, I don't know. It does result in like ego death. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe desire can be like pursuing one's desire can be a kind of ethics. Anyway, let's continue. Lacan's further point is that this covert sadeian dimension of an ethical sexual passion is not read into Kant by our eccentric interpretation, but is inherent to the Kantian theoretical edifice. If we put aside the body of circumstantial evidence, so true that fuck it, for it, isn't Kant's infamous definition of marriage the contract between two adults of the opposite sex about the mutual use of each other's organs, thoroughly sadeian since it reduces the other, the subject's sexual partner, to a partial object, his or her bodily organ, which provides pleasure, ignoring him or her as the whole of a human person. The crucial clue that allows us to discern the contours of Sade and Kant is the way Kant conceptualizes the relationship between sentiments, feelings, and the moral law. Wow. Zizek here has a reading of Lacan's reading of Sade in Kant that, if y'all, I don't know if y'all, like, know what the Copernican revolution is, but it's basically like, oops, sorry, jumble of wires. Basically, the Copernican revolution is like the way that they discovered that the Earth revolved around the sun and not vice versa is by like doing a flip, and Kant is kind of like this big shot in metaphysics because he did a Copernican revolution in terms of like the subject and object. So instead of being like we are created by the objective world, he's like, no, the objects of our perception are inherently created, partially at least, by the processes in our brain. If you want to learn more about this, look up like transcendental aesthetics. Anyway, so Zizek's reading of Sade and Kant is not saying that Kant is Sade, because Kant is like this fascistic, like domineering dominatrix figure who wants to punish you by and like sadistically take pleasure in how hard it is for you to be ethical, but rather by saying that Kant is Sade because following like pursuing your desires is an inherently ethical act. So he's like flipping it around. So one way, the earlier way, like Kant is the punisher, is like a fascistic reading of Kant that doesn't do him justice. But Sade as someone who is like inherently ethical by pursuing his desires is like, whoa, what the hell? Anyway, although Kant insists on the absolute gap between pathological sentiments and the pure form of moral law, there is one a priori sentiment that the subject necessarily experiences when confronted with the injunction of the moral law, the pain of humiliation, because of man's hurt pride, due to the radical evil of human nature. For Lacan, this Kantian privileging of pain as the only a priori sentiment is strictly correlative to Sade's notion of pain, torturing and humiliating the other, being tortured and humiliated by him, as the privileged way of access to sexual jouissance. Sade's argument, of course, is that pain is to be given priority over pleasure on account of its greater longevity. Yeah, so Sade is like an anti-hedonist in that way. Pleasures are passing while pain can last almost indefinitely. This link can be further substantiated by what Lacan calls the sadeian fundamental fantasy, the fantasy of another ethereal body of the victim which can be tortured indefinitely and nonetheless magically retains its beauty. See the standard sadeian figure of a young girl sustaining endless humiliations and mutilations from her deprived torturer and somehow mysteriously surviving it all intact, in the same way Tom and Jerry and other cartoon heroes survive all of their ridiculous ordeals intact. Doesn't this fantasy provide the libidinal foundation of the Kantian postulate of the immortality of the soul endlessly striving to achieve ethical perfection, i.e., is not the phantasmic truth of the immortality of the soul its exact opposite, the immortality of the body, its ability to sustain endless pain and humiliation? Judith Butler pointed out that the Foucauldian body as the site of resistance is none other than the Freudian psyche. Paradoxically, body is Foucault's name for the psychic apparatus insofar as it resists the soul's domination. Wow. I guess words just don't mean anything anymore. No. I mean, I vibe with it, like the body. I mean, like, forget dualism, but like the Foucauldian body kind of occupies the same space as the Freudian psyche. Continuing, that is to say, when, in his well-known definition of the soul as the prison of the body, Foucault turns around the standard Platonic Christian definition of the body as the prison of the soul. So many Copernican revolutions happening here. What Foucault calls body is not simply the biological, physical body, but is effectively already caught up into some kind of pre-subjective psychic apparatus. Consequently, don't we encounter in Kant a secret homologous inversion only in the opposite direction of the relationship between body and soul? What Kant calls immortality of the soul is effectively the immortality of the other ethereal undead body. Section 2. So we're reading Slavoj Zizek's essay Kant and Sade, the Ideal Couple. Section 2. It's via the central role of pain in the subject's ethical experience that Lacan introduces the difference between the subject of the enunciation, which is the subject who utters a statement, and the subject of the enunciated statement, which is the symbolic identity the subject assumes within and via his statement. Kant does not address the question of who is the subject of the enunciation or the moral law, the agent enunciating the unconditional ethical injunction. So true, like who is the speaker in Kant's ethical categorical imperative? You don't know who the persona is, so could be anyone. So from within his horizon, this question itself is meaningless, since the moral law is an impersonal command coming from nowhere, i.e., it is ultimately self-posited, autonomously assumed by the subject himself. Via the reference to Sade, Lacan reads absence in Kant as an act of rendering invisible, of repressing, the moral law's enunciator, and it is Sade who renders it visible in the figure of the sadist executioner torturer. This executioner is the enunciator of the moral law, the agent who finds pleasure in the moral subject's pain and humiliation. A counter-argument, a different way of reading, offers itself here with apparent self-evidence. Isn't all this utter nonsense since, in Sade, the element that occupies the place of the unconditional injunction, the maxim that the subject has to follow categorically, is no longer the Kantian universal ethical command, do your duty, but its most radical opposite, the injunction to follow to the utmost limit the thoroughly pathological, contingent caprices that bring you to pleasure, ruthlessly reducing all your fellow humans to the instruments of your pleasure. However, it is crucial to perceive the solidarity between this feature and the emergence of the figure of the sadist, torturer, executioner, as the effective subject of the enunciation of the universal ethical statement command. The Sadean move from Kantian respect to blasphemy, i.e. from respecting the other fellow being, his freedom and autonomy, and always treating him also as an end in itself, to reducing all others precisely to mere dispensable instruments to be ruthlessly exploited, is strictly correlative to the fact that the subject of the enunciation of the moral injunction, invisible in Kant, assumes the concrete features of the Sadean executioner. This is a fascist reading of it. The subject of the enunciation is just, like, who's the speaker? What Sade accomplishes is thus a very precise operation of breaking up the link between two elements which, in Kant's eyes, are synonymous and overlapping. The assertion of an unconditional ethical injunction, the moral universality of this injunction. Sade keeps the structure of an unconditional injunction, positing as its content the utmost pathological singularity. And, again, the crucial point is that this breaking up is not Sade's eccentricity. It lays dormant as a possibility in the very fundamental tension constitutive of the Cartesian subjectivity. Yeah, this, like, solipsistic subjectivity, who is, like, totally paranoid. Hegel was already aware of this reversal of the Kantian universal into the utmost idiosyncratic contingency. Isn't the main point of his critique of the Kantian ethical imperative that, since the imperative is empty, Kant has to fill it with some empirical content, thus conferring on the contingent particular content the form of universal necessity? The exemplary case of the pathological, contingent element elevated to the status of an unconditional demand is, of course, an artist absolutely identified with his artistic mission, pursuing it freely without any guilt, as an inner constraint, unable to survive without it. The sad fate of Jacqueline Dupre confronts us with a feminine version of the split between the unconditional injunction and its obverse, the serial universality of indifferent empirical objects that must be sacrificed in the pursuit of one's mission. It is extremely interesting and productive to read Dupre's life story not as a real story, but as a mythical narrative. What is so surprising about it is how closely it follows the preordained contours of a family myth, of a melodrama, the same as with the story of Caspar Hauser, in which individual accidents uncannily reproduce familiar features from ancient myths. Dupre's unconditional injunction, her drive, her absolute passion was her art. When she was 4 years old, upon seeing someone playing a cello, she already immediately claimed that this is what she wanted to be. Oh my god, you and me both, girl. Like, I genuinely think I have a learning disorder, because, like, I spent so much time on learning the cello as a kid. Like, I thought I was going to end up, like, being the third cellist in 2 cellos, but I don't know, I just never got any better at it. And it's like, okay, maybe I'm being dramatic, like, maybe I don't have a learning disability, but I'm definitely, like, musically, I'm, like, tone deaf or something, for sure. So, this elevation of Dupre's art to the unconditional relegated her love life to a series of encounters with men who were ultimately all substitutable, one as good as the other. She was reported to be a serial man-eater, make you work hard, make you spend hard, make you want all of her love. She's a man-eater. Sorry. Dupre thus occupied the place usually reserved for the male artist. No wonder her long tragic illness, multiple sclerosis, from which she was painfully dying from 1973 to 1987, was perceived by her mother as an answer of the real, as divine punishment not only for her promiscuous sexual life, but also for her excessive commitment to her art. Part 3. This, however, is not the whole story. The decisive question is the Kantian moral law translatable into the Freudian notion of the superego or not? If the answer is yes, then Kant with Sade effectively means that Sade is the truth of Kantian ethics. If, however, the Kantian moral law cannot be identified with the superego, since, as Lacan himself puts it in the last pages of the 4 fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis, moral law is equivalent to desire itself, while superego precisely feeds on the subject compromising his or her desire, i.e. the guilt sustained by the superego bears witness to the fact that the subject has somewhat betrayed or compromised his or her desire. Then Sade is not the entire truth of Kantian ethics, but a form of its perverted realization. So true, it's the Kant as Sade, Kant as superego people who have it the wrong way around. In short, far from being a more radical than Kant, Sade articulates what happens when the subject betrays the true stringency of the Kantian ethics. This difference is crucial in its political consequences. Insofar as the libidinal structure of totalitarian regimes is perverse, the totalitarian subject assumes the position of the object instrument of the other's jouissance. Sade as the truth of Kant would mean that Kantian ethics effectively harbors totalitarian potentials. However, insofar as we conceive of Kantian ethics as precisely prohibiting the subject to assume the position of the object instrument of the other's jouissance, i.e. to calling on him to assume full responsibility for what he proclaims as his duty, then Kant is the anti-totalitarian, the anti-fascist par excellence. Wow. The dream about Irma's injection that Freud used as the exemplary case to illustrate his procedure of analyzing dreams is a dream about responsibility, Freud's own responsibility for the failure of his treatment of Irma. This fact alone indicates that responsibility is a crucial Freudian notion. But how are we to conceive it? How are we to avoid the usual trap of the mauvaise foi, the bad faith, of the Sartrean subject responsible for his existential project, i.e. of the existentialist motif of ontological guilt that pertains to the finite human existence as such, as well as the opposite trap of putting the blame on the other? Since the unconscious is the discourse of the other, I am not responsible for its formulation. It is the big other who speaks through me. I am merely its instrument. Yeah, how do we, that's totally bad faith. Like, how do we avoid that? How do we do that, Zizek? Lacan himself pointed the way out of this deadlock by referring to Kant's philosophy as the crucial antecedent of the psychoanalytical ethics of the duty beyond the good. According to the standard pseudo-Hegelian critique, the Kantian universalist ethic of the categorical imperative fails to take into account the concrete historical situation in which the subject is embedded, and which provides the determinate content of the good. What eludes Kantian formalism is the historically specified particular substance of ethical life. However, this reproach can be countered by claiming that the unique strength of Kant's ethics resides in this very formal indeterminacy. Moral law does not tell me what my duty is. It merely tells me that I should accomplish my duty, i.e., it is not possible to derive the concrete norms I have to follow in my specific situation from the moral law itself. So true, it just gives you the form and not the content of what morality is. Which means that the subject himself has to assume the responsibility of translating the abstract injunction of the moral law into a series of concrete obligations. In this precise sense, one is tempted to risk a parallel with Kant's critique of judgment. The concrete formulation of a determinate ethical obligation has the structure of aesthetic judgment, i.e., of a judgment by which, instead of simply applying a universal category to a particular object or of subsuming this object under an already given universal determination, I, as it were, invent its universal necessary obligatory dimension, and thereby elevate this particular contingent object, which is an act, to the dignity of the ethical thing. You have the power. So, there is always something sublime about pronouncing a judgment that defines our duty. In it, I elevate an object to the dignity of the capital T thing. Lacan's definition of sublimation. The full acceptance of this paradox also compels us to reject any reference to duty as an excuse. You'll always be saying, I know this is heavy and can be painful, but what can I do? This is my duty. The standard motto of ethical rigor is, there is no excuse for not accomplishing one's duty. Although Kant's du kannst, denn du sollst, you can because you must, seems to offer a new version of this motto, he implicitly complements it with its much more uncanny inversion. There is no excuse for accomplishing one's duty. The reference to duty as the excuse to do our duty should be rejected as hypocritical. Suffice it to recall the proverbial example of a severe sadistic teacher who subjects his pupils to merciless discipline and torture. Of course, his excuse to himself, and to others, is, I myself find it hard to exert such pressure on the poor kids, but what can I do? It's just my duty. It's just my job, y'all. The more pertinent example is that of a Stalinist politician who loves mankind, but nonetheless performs horrible purges and executions. His heart is breaking and bleeding all over the damn place while he is doing it, but he cannot help it. It's his duty towards the progress of humanity. What we encounter here is the properly perverse attitude of adopting the position of the pure instrument of the big other's will. It's not my responsibility. It's not me who is effectively doing it. I'm merely an instrument of the higher historical necessity. Yeah, I'm just doing what, progress wants me to do. I don't know. That's, immediately, kind of, evading responsibility. Evading accountability. The obscene jouissance of the situation is generated by the fact that I conceive of myself as exculpated for what I am doing. Isn't it nice to be able to inflict pain on others with the full awareness that I'm not responsible for it, that I merely fulfill the other's will? This is what Kantian ethics prohibits. No. This position of the sadist pervert provides the answer to the question, how can the subject be guilty when he merely realizes an objective, externally imposed necessity? By subjectively assuming this objective necessity, i.e., by finding enjoyment in what is imposed on him, by subjectively assuming this objective necessity, i.e., by finding enjoyment in what is imposed on him. So, at its most radical, Kantian ethics is not sadist, but precisely what prohibits assuming the position of a sadeian executioner. Because it comes from you, and not from your evil father, or the superego. I don't know, I feel like in Asian families, the superego is not the father, but rather the mother. I don't know. My mother is constantly psychologically castrating me. And I don't know, many such cases, like Tiger Mum's My friend is Japanese, and his mum just seems like a nightmare to deal with. In a final twist, Lacan thus nonetheless undermines the thesis of Sade as the truth of Kant. It is no accident that the same seminar in which Lacan first deployed the inherent link between Kant and Sade also contains the detailed reading of Antigone, in which Lacan delineates the contours of an ethical act that does successfully avoid the trap of the Sadean perversion as its hidden truth. So, in Antigone, by insisting on her unconditional demand for her brother's proper burial, Antigone does not obey a command that humiliates her, a command effectively uttered by a sadistic executioner. She refuses to be the victim. So the main effort of Lacan's seminar on the ethics of psychoanalysis is precisely to break up the vicious cycle of Kant avec Sade. How is this possible? Only if, in contrast with Kant, one asserts that the faculty of desiring is not in itself pathological. In short, Lacan asserts the necessity of a critique of pure desire. God, that must have felt so satisfying to write. In short, Lacan asserts the necessity of a critique of pure desire. In contrast to Kant, for whom our capacity to desire is thoroughly pathological, since, as he repeatedly stresses, there is no a priori link between an empirical object and the pleasure this object generates in the subject. Lacan claims that there is a pure faculty of desire, since desire does have a non-pathological a priori object, cause. So desire does have a non-pathological a priori object cause. This object, of course, is what Lacan calls objet petit a. So like in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, he like talks about what are the necessary preconditions for experience. So like two things, for example, are space and time. What if there's a third thing? Desire. I went and watched the Sydney Chamber Orchestra perform like a scaled down version of Gustav Mahler's Songs for the Earth, Lied von der Erde, or however you pronounce it. And I don't know how I came to this conclusion, but it's basically like a Copernican revolution of shares. Like, is there life? Do you believe in life after love? Like, I don't think there's life after love, but I think that there is love before and after life. Like, desire will... Desire is in the subject, but it's prior to experience. And it does help you to transcend in some way. Anyway, I digress. Yeah.